right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power, and in today's video, I want to compare Nick Walker and Big Ramy. That seems to be the fun comparison that a lot of people are making right now because they're really kind of the two biggest freaks in bodybuilding right now. From a size standpoint, Ramy and Nick are really impressive when it comes to just being overwhelmingly big. Now, I think more realistically, the comparison that makes the most sense would probably either be Nick versus Bonac or Nick versus Hadi Chupin, because I think they're very similar in structure. They're very similar in stature, stage presence very similar. All of them shorter guys, all of them very heavily muscled. But when you see that conditioning that Hadi has and Bonac has, let's look at the side-by-side of Hadi and Nick. Hadi really brings an extra level of conditioning. He really comes in peeled, and he does it very, very consistently. Like I've said before, I don't think I've seen Hadi come in off, and you can just see those finer details on Hadi's physique in this most muscular pose. But the more fun comparison is Nick versus Ramy. I've seen a ton of these now, video comparisons on Instagram and that sort of thing, but this is going to be my version. So what I want to do in this, I'm not going to go through all 8 mandatory poses, but I want to give some poses that I think I could possibly conceive of Nick beating Ramy, and then some poses that I think Nick can't beat Ramy or would have a very, very hard time beating Ramy in. So the first pose is a pose that I think we could conceive of giving to Nick Walker, and this is the side tricep pose. And the reason why is pretty obvious. Nick's got crazy arms, triceps being 3/4 of the size of your arm. His arms are gigantic, and his triceps are really dominant as well. And one thing that I noticed with Ramy, and I checked both the pre-judging and the night show photos of Ramy hitting the side tricep, is he doesn't really fully lock out his arm, lock out his elbows during the side tricep, and you don't really see that deep horseshoe that Nick has right above the elbow. Ramy's is a little bit more shallow and thin, and Nick's is really deep and pronounced. And from Nick's side profile in general, I think is a very dominant side profile. Now, granted, Ramy, he's got these crazy legs, which really give him this crazy side profile. But look at Nick's calves compared to Ramy's. I think you could make an argument from this side shot, if Nick came in crazy peeled, I think you can make an argument for Nick beating Ramy in a side tricep. That's a shot that I think it could be a little bit more than a toss-up in favor of Nick. Now, let's go to a pose that I think Nick would have a very hard time beating Big Ramy. And this is a pose that I feel like is a little bit of Nick's Achilles heel, meaning this is one of, I would say this is probably his weakest pose, and that would be the front lat spread. For whatever reason, it could be his height, it could just be his structure, it could be the fact that the height that he is, having the amount of muscle that he is, it might make it hard for him to hit this pose, but the front lat spread is just not a very favorable pose for Nick. I don't know if there's any way where he could hit this differently if he brought his delts forward a little bit and didn't necessarily go like chest and belly first with it, if he had a little variation on it. But honestly, that's one of the poses that I think Nick would have a very hard time beating Big Ramy, because one of the things you're looking for in that pose is width. Very specifically, the width of your lats, and then also going into play with that is the V-taper of your lats from the front. You can barely see Nick's lats from the front in some of these front lat spread shots. And again, that's not to say that Nick doesn't have a good back or good lats. It's just that for whatever reason in this pose, his structure or his height or whatever prevents him from really maximizing this pose. And this would be one where I think it would be a very tough argument for him to beat Ramy or even Hadi or Bonac. So this is one of the ones that I think is one of the weaknesses in Nick's physique. And I know that Nick's put a lot of time and effort into posing and controlling the midsection, because you could tell that his posing was very on point at the Arnold, the way that he held his poses. He didn't shake or anything. That would be something I would try to practice some variations of, because he did the variations of the front double bicep where he had crunched abs and then expanded abs but kind of sucked in like a vacuum. I don't know if there's some kind of variation of the way that he can hit this front lat spread to make it look different or make it look better, but this is one where I think you'd have a hard time making an argument for Nick over Ramy. If we're talking about a scenario where Nick could potentially win the Olympia, this would be a pose that I think would maybe prevent that from happening. Now, the next one, I want to give out a pose that I feel like is a bit of a toss-up, where Nick and Ramy could actually be, they could find themselves in a scenario where they're pretty evenly matched in this pose, and that is the abs and thighs. Now, right off the bat, you're inclined to want to give this pose to Ramy, because Ramy's got pretty much the craziest quads, the craziest thighs in the game. But this is the abs and thighs pose. So Nick, he's got pretty big legs as well. He's got pretty separated, pretty big quads. that look pretty good in this shot as well. But I would say Nick has the better abs in this shot, the deeper, more defined, more separated abs, maybe creating for Nick the more balanced version of this pose. So while Ramy looks really dominant in this pose because his thighs are significantly bigger and better, it's not as balanced as Nick. Nick has the balance of really good quads and really good abs, making this pose look really dominant for him, whereas Ramy, his abs look good, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same level as Nick's. So this is a pose where I feel like Ramy and Nick could be really comparable. This could be a pose that winds up being very close. And the elephant in the room when making these types of videos is obviously conditioning. We're only going off of what we can see from Nick Walker at the 2021 Arnold and Big Ramy at the 2020 Olympia. So we're kind of making a major assumption that both of these guys are going to be in shape or at least similar shape to both of these shows that we're looking at here. Because obviously if either one of them came in completely off from a conditioning standpoint, they would probably lose every pose to the other person. So that's why these types of videos, while they are very fun, are a bit silly to make because there's a pretty big wild card there in how close will these guys actually look to these pictures from their last showing to even make this comparison. But it is fun. I do enjoy doing it. Now, the next pose I want to look at here is the front double bicep, and this is a pose that I'll be honest, this is one that I think we could give to Nick. Just in general, I think this is a bit of an awkward pose for Ramy. I think it's certainly not one of his strongest poses. And I think it's one of the poses where if you look back at some of the pictures from the 2020 Olympia, this is one of the poses I would actually give to Brandon over Ramy. Brandon has a tremendous front double bicep, and while Ramy doesn't look bad in this pose, it's just kind of an awkward pose for him. And I think that honestly, this is a really, really strong pose for Nick Walker, because if you look at Nick, he gets the opportunity to really show off all his strong points, the obvious being his arms, specifically his biceps. I think his biceps are one of his strongest body parts. He has extremely peaked, but extremely just thick and dense. He's got crazy biceps, but he also gets the opportunity in this pose to showcase that crunched abdominal that he's been working on, to showcase the separation in his abs. You can see the separation in his legs. The way he hits the pose is very good. And he looks very balanced, and he looks very complete in this particular pose. And he doesn't look awkward like Ramy looks. Now, he doesn't look as aesthetic as a guy like Brandon Curry looks in this pose, but he does look he just looks solid. It's a really good pose for Nick, I think. And this is one where if you put them in Olympia call-out where Nick's in exceptional shape, you can make an argument, I think, for Nick over Ramy in this pose. And again, these are very subjective what-ifs, but they are interesting what-ifs to make. So look, those are just a couple of the poses that I thought would be exciting poses between Nick and Ramy to compare. Some poses I think Nick is dominant, some poses that I think Ramy is dominant, and some poses that I think could be a toss-up. Just a little bit of food for thought going into the Olympia, something to think about here. Now, what poses would you include in this video? What poses would you give to Nick? What poses would you give to Ramy? And who do you have winning this year's Olympia if you haven't told me already? Is it going to be Nick? Is it going to be Ramy? Are you excited for the Olympia? Give the video a thumbs up if you're excited for the Olympia this year. I'm certainly excited. I hope you guys are enjoying all this two-a-day content that I've been doing, trying to keep you guys entertained and excited for the Olympia. If you have, like the video. It helps out a lot. It's free. It's easy. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Subscribe if you haven't already. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.